figure out why my camera isn't doing camera
Yeah,
things.
where's your face at, buddy?
Right?
I mean,
We'll
I
figure it
like your little icon there. That's fun to look at. But
out. Hey, that was fan art sent by a person who made a thing. Uh,
cool. I had when
wait,
we did that D&D live stream, I had one of my followers make me a fan art of like my Gordunkel druid character, and that was pretty cool.
I love that.
Yeah.
Blurp.
There you are.
Hey,
Hello. Hi.
hello.
How you doing? It's been a while since I saw your face like in real time. I mean, I see it all the time pop up, but you're talking to, audiences rather than me. So,
Yeah, dude, it's been a minute. It has been a minute. How have
yeah.
you been?
Yeah. I'm good. I actually finished my goddamn book and I have like a physical printed copy of it, which is feels like a big deal after several years of working on it. So,
That's fantastic.
yeah, it's nice to, I feel like I was carrying the monkey on my back of working on the book for so long, which sort of felt like going back to school and being like, oh my God, I have like a dissertation to finish, except this time I don't have an advisor and like it's just like free form. But now I have the problem of being like, well, I finished it, but what the fuck do I do and how do I promote it and all of that stuff. So it's like a whole new set of challenges, which is,
I have I have
life.
such an issue with every time I finish any project ever, I immediately hate it, and I'm like, okay, well, I could have done so much better. It's the second before I even hit publish, I'm like, well, I know how I could have probably improved this. So I'm worried if I put in that much time for a book, then I'll just hate everything so much I won't know what to do with myself. You know what I mean?
I mean, I don't hate everything, but there's certainly things that I'm like, shit, now this is in print. I like really wish I could change. Like, they're mostly small things. Like, I did a lot of iterations on this. The one that drives me nuts is at the end of the book, I did a lot of QR codes in the book. So as part of the idea is like, I can't put enough photos of a mushroom in a book to really help you with identification, but I put a QR code that leads you to iNaturalist and helps you like see thousands of photos of a mushroom. So
Yeah.
the very end of the book, I was like, I'm going to put a QR code in that sort of like author's notes. It was basically a way to cover my ass in case I made like mistakes or names have changed or typos or something like that. And that QR code, like my publisher used the wrong QR code. So it was like the one thing in the book I put in to cover my ass is the one thing that they like actually screwed up on which QR code to use. Which is, and it's going to be in print. I'm just like, God damn it. Fortunately it links to my website, but I just have to like put a big banner that's like, here's the author's notes. So it
Nice.
goes. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I get you. There's a I just released a new long the sex sensibility video that you helped to look over,
Yeah.
by the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just released that, and I included graphics and information from like the one from like the NIH. I put up this cool graphic of. I put a whole thing about like gender diverse cultures, and like a map of those and everything. And I have all those in my sources and everything. And several of those things have now been pulled down because of the Trump administration. And so it's like
Oh, yeah. So
I
you're
have all these
citing resources that don't exist anymore, and
that
you're
no
like,
longer
God.
exist because you are not allowed to publish research with the word woman in it anymore. And so it's just like, ah,
Yeah, I feel like you and I could have a very long discussion about all of the horrible things that have happened to science recently, from like the pulling down of climate data to like defunding the NIH. I'm trying in some ways to sort of like, I knew when the election went that way that all of this was going to be the inevitable consequence, and it was part of Project 2025. It's like the bringing on of the crazy guy who's in charge of all our health and human services stuff now. Like, I have a friend at the CDC, and I was like, "Hey, dude, how's it going?" He's like, "Not good." Like, I lost half my staff. Anyhow, what I want to do is not get embroiled in all of that, because it's like it makes me want to like cry, scream, and vomit and shit myself all at the same time. And I'm kind of just sitting in that feeling, being like, this is not a great feeling. Which is part
right?
of why I've been going out and hunting mushrooms, because like I'm leaning into like whimsy and just fucking being in the woods, because that's all I really can do. Um,
Yeah,
and well, first, I'm what I want to do is in this discussion is Forrest and I we're talking about doing a live stream, and then we're like, screw it, let's do it on TikTok because it's way less serious on TikTok than if we're on YouTube or Instagram or somewhere else. Um, but I love the idea of doing a collaboration like fungal video where, dovetailing on talking about like sex and reproduction in fungi, which is insanely complicated. I didn't go into all the stuff and the weird ways they do things, but we can talk about it a little bit. But you and I was like, let's get on and like workshop some ideas about a video about fungi. And I thought that maybe just us talking about stuff could like help you later on say, okay, I want to come back and like explore this, do that, whatever. And then we have this like recorded conversation that you can like pull from as a resource.
I'm definitely down with that. I don't know if you're
Okay,
seeing. Do we have separate comment sections here?
we
Because
have
I've got
separate
Nat here.
comments. Yeah, okay. I've
Is
got Nat
this
too. Hi, Nat. We saw you. I also saw
hi?
Sound of the Forest, who's another awesome creator. If she's
Oh,
still in
good.
here, and I
Yeah,
think yeah, yeah, she's on YouTube now too. A lot
that's
of people have made
fantastic.
the jump as we need to. Yeah. Hey, Nat. How you doing?
Hello to you. Hello to both
Okay,
of
cool.
you.
I guess
Nat
I
and
guess we
Kelsey.
yeah we have shared. Oh, Gabrielle just joined too. Cool. I was thinking about hitting her up, and um, my friend Gabrielle, Chaotic Forager, also just wrote a book, which is like very good. Mine is like very informational, and hers is like incredibly well written. All these like insanely personal, profound accounts of foraging and seasons and all that stuff. And it's sort of like it made me embarrassed because it's like my book is just like fire hose of information, but her book actually has like stories and personality. And it's like, oh. And what I wanted to ask you for is before we even get into mushroom stuff was how's your master's going? Like, how is it to be in grad school still, or like, where are you in the process of things? Have you?
Yeah, so I'm extremely stupid, and so I went back for another one. Is what I did.
You're
Uh,
double mastering. That was it. Okay, you're not doing a
yeah,
PhD, but you're doing another master's. Just
I can't stress
because.
enough how dumb I am. Yes, and so like I basically what it is that so my first master's was in bioanthropology with a concentration in human evolution and zooarchaeology and research into paleoecological reconstruction. And I wrote that
Right.
thesis and I wanted to die. It just sucked and I wasn't having fun. And I got to this point where I was like, I have written more than I've ever written in my life, but I feel like I haven't learned anything new. I'm
Mm,
just writing about stuff that I already know. And I'm
mm.
spending all my time reading papers about stuff that I already know to get one more sentence in this thing to just further demonstrate what I'm talking about that I already fucking know. And I just felt miserable with it. Um, and so I left there and I decided I wasn't going to do a PhD because I didn't want to write all that stuff. And so I did a second master's instead. I moved to a different university, and this master's is in biomedical sciences with a
Oh, okay.
focused concentration in human anatomy and vertebrate paleontology because this university wrote the paleontology department and the biomed department together because paleontologists are really good anatomists. And so we have the medical school and we're giving out people, we're making doctors, and then they have the biomedical sciences masters, and all of the professors for all of this study dinosaurs. And so like we'll literally like in the gross anatomy, like they have the medical side, but then like for like the gross anatomy for like medical students and everything, they're like, here's how your lungs work, and then also here's how they work in sauropods if you're curious, and like just some cool stuff. And so
Is it
my
like
I've
like
had
the homology of physical structures kind of thing, or like?
yeah,
Yeah.
and like differences in evolution there. So like my favorite exam that I ever took. I've had so much fucking fun with this degree. My favorite exam ever was during the clinical anatomy program. We had a cadaver lab, and there was a written exam, a practical exam, and then there was an additional bonus oral exam just for the grad students. And so
Okay.
for me, um, I had this special exam where it was just me and like two or three professors, and they would give me a cadaver and whatever extra bonus organs I needed to pull from one of the organ cabinets. And I could use any
I'm
models of them.
cringing in horror as a person who's like, I'm a microbiologist for a reason. You bring it to a cadaver. I'm like, no, hard pass. Like,
Oh,
no,
dude,
thank you. And you're like,
I've
what are you juggling kidneys as you're like looking at this cadaver?
I've cut up dozens of humans, most
Oh
of
my
them
god.
dead.
Oh,
And you also get a whiteboard as well. And then they just ask you a question, and you have 30 minutes to answer the fuck out of this question as best as you can with all the
okay.
resources provided.
To like
And so
really explain
literally,
it.
yeah, and so my favorite exam question was open this cadaver, pull out the heart and lungs, explain the pulmonary circuit, like explain in great detail how the heart and lungs work, showing all these structures, how this break it down in thorough detail, and then compare all of that to birds and explain how they evolve differently and why they work differently. And so
Well,
talk about bird lungs and
when
explain why they
birds have like three chambered hearts, right? Versus we have a four chambered heart, if I remember like basic anatomy. Okay.
they They have a three chamber heart. I'm pretty sure that's the right. It was mainly about the lungs. So the
Oh,
lungs
lungs.
is the
Okay.
biggest difference for they have instead of having we have a single path in and out, and so we have just one stroke in, one stroke out, two stroke engine for your lungs. Birds have a four stroke engine, so it takes four breaths to get your breath all the way through. It goes into the lung, there's a separate like air sac, and then the lung is unidirectional. Instead of having a bidirectional lung where it goes into the sac, absorbs, and gets pushed back out, the air gets pushed across the lungs into another air sac and then gets pushed out. And it makes them so much more efficient, so much easier to clog and get gross shit in. So you have more respiratory conditions
because they can't like push out through the same.
Yeah, because you can get something gunked up in one side and not be able to cough it up because it has to cough through the entire fucking lung system.
So you're telling me birds can't cough?
I mean, they can. It's just not as effective.
Okay, not as efficient.
And so, like, in explaining, like, the evolution of those things and talking a little bit more about, like, why they're so different. And the whole time, I'm doing this with a human lung in one hand and a whiteboard eraser marker in the other hand. You know what I mean? Like, a expo marker, that's the word. And
was it
so
like dripping? Just, like, do you have, like, gloves on?
I mean, yeah, well, you have gloves on, yeah. So when I was in my undergrad, one of my undergrad degrees, I was able to focus a little bit on biomed and do some cadaveric dissection there. And then I also had a independent field research requirement for that. And I focused on like evolution of human walking. And I got to go to this other place. You had to find any scientist at any other university and study under them for a semester with whatever you wanted to do. That was the requirement for the class. And so I actually found this guy who was a paleontologist who did cadaver stuff. And he was like, you want to come cut up some human legs and figure out if you can learn some stuff about bipedalism? Come do it. And so I spent the summer, I was working at an animal sanctuary. And I spent the summer traveling, like I would work at the animal sanctuary and then take my lunch break, drive down the road to that university, cut up dead people while in my zookeeper uniform, and then go back and like start handling snakes again. And they'd be like, why do you stink like formaldehyde? I'm like, don't worry about it. You want to learn about pythons? Let's talk about it. And then this master's that I'm in now is actually at that university where I did that field research when my advisor is that guy that allowed me to do that. And so at this point, like I said, I've got hundreds of hours of cadaver dissection under my belt. I've cut up dozens and dozens of people. All
do you
just
have interest in
cool
being?
stuff.
But do you want to be a doctor? Do you have all this anatomy knowledge? Do you want to? I mean, you already are a teacher. Do you want to teach at an academic level, or like, do you have an end goal for some of this stuff?
I would love to teach at a community college. That sounds like a hell of a lot of fun, and it sounds like a great way to like bring. Community colleges are good for the community. You know, it's not for people who like were trying to get straight A's all through school and get into a good college. It's for people who just like want to change their life, and I want academia to be representative of the community that I live in, and that level of diversity, both in race, gender, socioeconomic status, everything that comes from community colleges. And so I want to teach at a community college someday, just a little bit. That sounds hella fun. But honestly, I don't want to be a doctor or anything like that. I have found a niche in just loving humans and studying humans, you know what I mean? And so, like, with my first master's being in bioanthro, studying where humans came from and specifically studying, like, hominin-specific adaptations and selection pressures surrounding them, now looking at humans today and studying biomed and learning, like, what makes our bodies work and why they are the way they are and what can go wrong with them, and, like, digging into like the serious details. And also because it has this paleontology perspective, I got to take a graduate level course in evolutionary developmental biology, and I got to take graduate level neuroscience, and I got to take graduate level like a paleontology like field research stuff, and I got to take and all of these things in such a diverse way that I wouldn't be able to do if I was just doing straight just medical stuff. And so I am currently in my last semester of that. This semester, I am just doing one class in neuroanatomy, and I get to do some free independent study on literally whatever the fuck I want, and I'm picking ethology. And so I'm studying like behavioral evolution just for fun. And so like that's what I'm doing now. And after that, I don't fucking know, man. I might pick up like maybe another. I found out that I'm only 3 semesters away from a bachelor's in psychology, so why the fuck not? Maybe that. Uh, I might go for an EDD instead of a PhD because I like teaching more than anything. I
Okay.
don't know. I'm
Yeah,
just
all
having
right.
fun learning. I don't want to stop doing that.
I mean, you strike me as someone who gains joy from learning things, and like clearly, I think part of your content is also part of how you teach yourself. Like that's the same for me, in that like by making content about something and trying to figure out how to explain it to people, you're really figuring out how to explain it to yourself and how to internalize that knowledge, which is like I feel like most teachers are also sort of dedicated learners because that's kind of the whole point of trying to teach is you try an iteration of something, you explain it one way, and then you're like maybe that didn't quite hit, so let me try it again. And by like the fourth or fifth iteration, you're like, all right, now I've got the metaphor down. Now we're ready to go. Let's
Yeah.
do a video. Also, like all of your videos, I mentioned these way back in the day, but like it's insane that you can talk for like 3 or 4 minutes without a single and what and stumbling over your word. Like I know you take a lot of takes, but holy shit, dude, you were like watching you talk about stuff is incredible. Like
Well, that is very kind. That is very kind of you. But that is the goal. Is just to keep learning stuff and like 'cause the more cool shit that I learn, the more cool shit I can teach. And
yeah.
and yeah, the major thing for me is every time I learn something new, the first thing in my head is like, okay, well, how am I going to explain this to an elementary school kid? How do I
Mhm.
explain this to a high school kid? How do I explain this to a peer? How do I explain this to somebody who knows more than me about it? You know what I mean? And
Well, it's
so
it's
if
it's
I
not just that; it's also like different intelligence types too, which I can tell like you have paid attention to in your videos because you're able to appeal to these different ways of viewing and learning.
I try to
Experiential,
say things,
visual.
I try to say things 3 different ways at the same time if I
Yes,
can. Yeah.
yes. It's again, it's clear to me. It's part of why I watch your content. I'm like, God damn, he's good. Like, there
Well,
should
thank
be
you.
teachers watching you to figure out how we were presenting stuff to do a similar type of informational flow. Good.
That is very kind. That is very kind of you to say.
Yeah. I mean,
I'm
you
trying to
and
if I
also
can get more and more degrees. I want to break this shelf up here. That's the goal. Is I got the diploma shelf up here, and I'm going to break that shit.
I mean, I only got two, but the PhD is a weighty one. But goddamn, it took a long time, and it hasn't. Honestly, a PhD hasn't helped me get a career. It's given me
No,
clout and gravitas, and the ability to insert myself into conversations that maybe I don't belong to. Because I'm like, I have a PhD, but it really doesn't like it hasn't gotten me a job. It's sort of almost the
yeah,
opposite. Most things I apply to, they're like, yeah, we'd rather have someone with a master's because like they're easy to tell what to do, and I'm not very easy to tell what to do because I'll argue with you about it.
exactly. Yeah, you become more recalcitrant the more educated you are, and like that is the damned old misery of it. I'm on my this will be my sixth, and I feel stupid still. Uh,
Sixth degree.
yeah, I have 4 undergrad degrees, and this will be my second master's. Um, and
You might get pick up a fifth one, just fuck around.
right? And so like, but yeah, and I feel dumb as shit. The imposter syndrome gets worse with everyone, and I know that I feel like I'm not anything until I have a PhD, and once I get a PhD, I will feel like I don't deserve it, and that'll just be how it is.
I mean, I don't necessarily feel that I don't deserve it, but like I suffered heavily from imposter syndrome while doing my PhD, and then like while having it, I sort of felt like people would be like, "But you're so young to have a PhD." And I was like, "A, I'm not as young as you think I am," and also B, like it's just an age thing. It's like for me, getting a PhD was just jumping through hoops. It wasn't like anything I did during the PhD was magnificently that much harder than anything I did in my undergrad or anywhere else. There was challenges and there's certain like peaks you got to hit that activation energy to like get over something and get through it, but
Yeah.
you just do that enough times in a row and then suddenly they're like here's a PhD and I was like oh shit, I earn this, do I really deserve this? And now even though like I'm a doctor, but I'm a doctor who fondles fungi for a living, and so that's also kind of a weird dynamic. I gave a talk earlier this year. It was titled like "From Academia to Social Media: How I Became a Professional Fungus Fondler," which
Nice.
embarrassing title, but it was descriptive. Hey, do you
No,
have
that's great.
a pair
That's
of headphones around?
yeah, I do. Is it bad?
No, it's not bad. I think it's if we both talk at the same time though, your audio gets blocked, so it's easier for us to like have a dynamic back and forth if we're both wearing headphones.
Is that better?
Yeah, you sound exactly the same. I think it's just my audio doesn't like we can talk at the same time without it
Gotcha.
Whatever. It works better that way.
Yeah, yeah, no, I
Okay,
got you.
so perfect. So you are doing cool shit. You have 5 degrees, and you're gonna break your shelf. Well,
That's the
almost
plan.
down, almost six
That's the
degrees,
plan.
and headed towards 7, possibly 8. So, and what I want to point out to anyone who's listening is Forrest and I are empirically smart people. At least our credentials say that we're smart.
You are. You are. I'm just
You
here.
are. Well, same.
Mm.
I feel like the dumbest motherfucker on the planet on a regular basis. I can barely put on pants without falling over. You know, like.
Yeah, dude.
But
You
there's a
get
lot
it.
of people
You
out there
get
who would
it.
point at us and be like, "Those guys are smart," and be like, "Pump the brakes on that." You know,
We've
you and
got
I
you
have
fooled.
learned how to jump through hoops, and
Hmm.
we potentially have a ability to regurgitate shit that we've heard and learned.
Hmm.
And what I want to tell people on TikTok who watch us and sort of say, I want to like be like them is like, well, hey, it's not that hard to be like us. You just keep doing stuff and you be interested, you be fascinated, you like, learn how to chew on stuff and then figure out how to explain it to your friends. And suddenly you've just become a teacher. And then the next step is like figuring out how to make videos about it, which honestly, you do a much better video of like their job of being a talking head at a camera than I do most of the time.
That's
So
I feel like that's I think that is a good way to say it. Just like just dig it. A lot of people like they look at academia in general as if it's this like insurmountable mountain or like this thing that they have to like earn their right to be a part of. And like no, so, what if I can convince anybody of anything, it would be that science is all around you all the time. And the more
mhm.
curious you get, and the more interested you get, like you'll just start picking stuff up. And I get asked a lot. People are like, "Well, how do I study biology or whatever?" It's like just start being look at the weirdest shit that you possibly can, and just stick with that. And then you'll ask more questions, and you'll get to mundane things later when you need to know why this happens and this happens and this happens. But like, just the more you study in the most irreverent and just very deeply personal way possible, the better you'll be. My studying style is insane and undisciplined and uncoordinated. My wife makes fun of me all the time because she's like, I've seen how you study, or rather, how you fucking don't study, and somehow still get an A because, like, I just get excited about the thing, and then I'll spend like a night just reading the hell out of papers, and then I'll spend the next day in class just like processing things differently, and then all of a sudden I can start vomiting knowledge about this whatever like that. It's what works for me, and I don't know.
And you go down one of those kind of
Also,
like special interest wormhole things, and then suddenly you come out the other
yeah.
end with like, I guess I retained a few of those facts, or like it's also like
Mhm.
you read all that stuff, and then like you're saying, the fact that you're then talking about it and using that knowledge the next day is creating those little mental pathways. It helps like
Mhm.
cement and solidify in the same way that like when you're in class, you're supposed to take notes. And I
Mhm.
almost never use my notes, but it was the process of writing stuff down that helped me like
Yes.
contextualize and kind of create that mental framework, which you're then drawing on later. So same idea.
Yeah, no, if you that's something I try to tell like not only like my students but like anybody that I'm working with and I'm trying to tell them how to learn. That is a big one. Is like don't take notes on a computer unless you have to. Like if you have some sort of a disability that's the only way to do it, that's fine. But like it's still important. The thing is you have to be taking in information, processing it in order to make it into shorthand and the things that stick out to you, and then physically writing it out. Even if you're doing it on a keyboard, at least something. Like the fact is, you can, if you just record the lecture, you're not getting the same quality of education, because if you don't have time to write everything down and you are forced to reword and reprocess everything instantly while trying to listen, it's so much harder, but you will learn so much more stuff. You'll retain so much more stuff. And
Yeah.
also, going out, like I can't tell you how much I've learned by debunking creationists and shit too. Um,
Well,
I
because
one of
again,
the
their
special
arguments they seem like on a very surface level. They say something, you're like, well, of course it seems valid, and you're like, well, first as a scientist, you're like, no, absolutely not. But you're like, okay,
Mhm.
let's go with this thing that seems like. I remember my dad when I was growing up. He works on DNA repair, and he had some DNA repair enzyme that was like very well fit to the substrate. And basically, this creationist magazine picked it up as an example of intelligent design. And my dad
Yeah.
is a scientist. He was, of course, this is not intelligent design. But basically, the article was making the argument that like, well, bananas had to be intelligently designed because look, it's a fruit that comes with its own casing that you just peel off. And they were like, well,
The
this
whole Ray Comfort
if this
thing.
enzyme is so perfectly adapted to its substrate, it must have been intelligently designed, right? And like, there's so, and on a very surface level, you're like, oh, of course, I guess a banana is, you know, and you're like, no, there was a lot of human selection and breeding, and you know, like wild bananas look nothing like that, and shared cruelty, and so it's like that kind of thing can be so easily debunked if you just take one more step to be like, but wait a second. But if you're not a critical thinker, or you're willing to just accept stuff, you're like, oh, of course that's intelligent. Yes, you get it
exactly. I've like the amount of times like I learned so much about sex and gender from arguing about this with like, you know, people who are like binary essentialists. I've learned so much about evolution by arguing with creationists. I learned so much about physics by arguing with flat earthers. And it's stuff that like I've learned, like obviously I learned a bunch through school and I learned foundation and everything like that, but like people don't realize that having any degree doesn't mean you learn everything there is to know about the thing. They just teach you how to learn about that thing.
Yes.
And
yeah,
so
that's in essence, that's what college is. It's just learning how to learn, regardless of what subject you choose.
Yeah, exactly. And so like right now, I have this series called Reacteria over on my YouTube, where it is all just like, here's a creationist video. Let's explain why it makes no fucking sense. And there's not only does it make me better, like a better scientist, but also a better educator. Because like the first videos in that series, I explained the exact same things as the ones that I'm about to record later today. Exact same concepts, exact same argument, but I am now doing it so much better. I'm teaching it better, and I understand it better than the first time. Because like I've explained it the way that I explained it in school, and it, like that works with people who already get it. Doesn't work with other people. You know what I mean? And so like I've gotten to this point now where it's like I can hear the comment section in my head before I've even like recorded the video. I can tell what the next common counter argument is going to be. I actually literally
the logical flow of how they try to counter you. So I see it in your videos because you're like, I'm ready for all of the stuff you're about to say, and then you can just like slot that in. Sorry, I didn't interrupt. Go ahead.
No, you're just fine. I was just going to say there's a pair of kids named John and Jane who make these. There's this terrible series by Genesis Apologetics of John and Jane Debunk Evolution. It's these two high school kids that read their biology textbook from high school, and they're like, it says here that vestigial structures are this and that. Well, let's explain why vestigial structure. And I just literally, right before I sat down, this just came in the mail. I bought the textbook they use in that series. This is the high school textbook they use in that show. So that now, and this thing is, gosh, when was this published? This thing is 1,000 years. It looks
it's old. So they're trying to explain stuff. They like, the stuff has been updated since then.
This was published in 2010.
That's not bad. And it's all my textbooks from earlier. But.
This is when I graduated high school in 2010 is when this came out.
God, I'm old.
But like, yeah, I just like, it's so cool to like now get to like dig through this and see like when they're like, it says this little thing where it talks about whatever. And it's like, okay, so now I can actually look at the book that you're talking about and see that on the next page they explained why the thing you just said was wrong.
Wrong, yeah. So which also makes me just look. Go ahead.
If you can see in the comments here, Avix here, and now you can read the next sentence. That is the move. Anytime somebody, if a creationist says, here's this evolutionist who says this thing, you find the thing they said and read the next sentence. It always tells you why the creationist is wrong in this mischaracterization. Also, we got fucking Scotty in here. How are you, my dude? Get out of here. Or don't. I'm not a fan. It's probably 1 a.m. for you or something.
Well, so one of the things I was going to say that struck a nerve with me is you're talking about people referencing, coming in with these sort of bad faith arguments, but because they're based on sort of talking points, you are like preset and ready to kind of debunk, answer, and just sort of like negate some of these things where it's just like absolute gobbledygook because you're practiced at doing that. And this is something that like within the realm of human evolution, I feel I know this stuff really well, but it'd be hard for me to do because I haven't had as much practice sort of fending off people attacking me on points like that. But what I have had experience with is people commenting on mushrooms. So just like you said, like I make a post and in the caption, I will pre-answer all of the questions. And because I know in a similar way, that's what like live streaming and making content and producing stuff as a creator has allowed me to do is I know potentially what's in books. I know I didn't actually take any mushroom classes ever in school. Everything I've learned about mushrooms has pretty much been self-taught. But again, I learned how to learn. But in the same way, I know a lot of the same things I'm going to get, like Amanita muscaria. You post a video about this and half the people are like, that's deadly toxic. And you're like, no, actually this contains isoaxols and like ibotenic acid and muscimol are like, ibotenic acid is a neurotoxin and muscimol is like a GABA agonist that actually acts like alcohol in your system. But these are things that are like easily explainable through chemistry. And of course, every time you post muscaria, there's someone who's like, oh, bro, drink reindeer pee. And you're like, no, that shit's gross. How about you do like a decarboxylation and turn ibotenic acid into muscimol? It's like all of these things. And I sort of like try to pre-answer it. The thing that kills me is then people like put all this stuff in the comments and I'm like, hey, please read the caption. Like all of these answers are here, but it's that there's a weird like sense of entitlement that people have to like, well, if you don't answer me personally, then it's not a real answer. And even then it's a bad argument in the first place. So you're like, you don't care if I answer you or not, because you're really just like throwing out your point of view as if it were like a legitimate counter argument to all of the evidence I've presented. And your point of view is somehow like equivalent, which is the same problem that in Fox News when they have like a climate change denier and a scientist, and they're like, this is a valid point of view. And you're like, no, it's not. But that's what we just elected to the White House.
It goes against like we need like the fairness doctrine and whatnot. But like you're absolutely right, because they'll put up one science denier and one scientist as if they're on equal playing field, and these are the two people that we can like. Well, one is right, and what it should look like is one science denier and like 10,000 scientists all saying like, no, actually, here's how. Like that's the actual way it should look in order to look anything representative of what the actual situation is. And I understand entirely what you're saying, because I do the same thing. I will, I just released that sex and gender video, and I've got people in the comments saying like, oh, he's the only person who believes it. Check the like 15 reviewers that I listed in the description that like looked over this. Check the sources that I talked about. Well, some of these sources disagree with you. Yes, because it's my job to show you like the history of thought in this. And unfortunately, I didn't put like everything showing where each source goes, but if you dug through it, you would see where this goes and like how these things work. I'm trying not to do anybody. I'm happy to have a discussion with somebody. I don't want to do people's homework. You know what I'm saying? Right. And I've gotten to this point,
especially not when you've done the homework like TikTok, in the video to present the information. Like the information you're presenting is already there. They could watch it and listen to it instead of rejecting everything you say. Like,
right. There's I've done so much, like when I first started on TikTok, I would argue with one person in the comment section all day. Even on Instagram, it's like, hey, I'll spend a day and a half just because I can type out a fucking page of text and put it on this thing. And I just stopped doing it and now you've hosted with me over on the line. If I can get somebody to call into the line, I can have a serious discussion with them, really break down these topics as best as they will let me. I can speak much more quickly and much more detailed than I can, write out a fucking comment, where we have these limitations of the comment section. And also I can make content out of it. And then other people will learn. And I feel selfish. Like it really, I understand how much of an asshole it makes me sound like. And I only partially apologize for it. Because like, I can either spend my entire day trying to condense like a semester's worth of knowledge down into a fucking Instagram comment for you to ignore, and then it goes nowhere. Or I can get on a call-in show, and you can pick up the fucking phone, and I can just say whatever needs to be said and answer your questions in real time. Bam, bam, bam. We can knock down all these things. And also 1,000 other people will hear it and learn from it. And like that is so much more productive for my time, for my audience's time. Like that is such a better use of everyone's time and efforts. And so like I've most of my comments now end in, hey, I host the line every single Sunday, call me. I feel like a dickhole doing that, but like it is just so much of a more productive use of my time and efforts. And I feel like it's better for everybody else trying to learn as well.
I know exactly what you're saying. It's the same kind of thing that like I can try to answer this person, but again, it's a bad faith argument in the first place. It's hard to tell too online. Is someone trolling you? Are they literally just being contrarian? Do they legitimately not know or understand? Like you have no idea where someone's coming from. You can look at their profile, and if you see like, you know, some old guy in sunglasses and like an American flag, you're like, okay, I know where you're coming from. But like a lot of the time, it's like, you know, an anime thing or the K-pop, and you're like, I don't know. Are you 13? Are you 48? I don't know. Do you have an education? Yes or no? Do you speak English? I don't even know. And so for me, that's part of why I wrote the book, because the book is a way to say, hey, you can argue with me all you want about this mushroom, but like I literally just published a book that is, you know, going to be, it's by Penguin Random House in like 10 speed. So it's a legitimate publisher. It's not like, I'm not like self-publishing on Amazon kind of thing. This is like, has momentum, has a lot of sources. But in that same manner, I was like, the efficiency in which I can talk about something and the added complexity and nuance they can add with my voice via like my podcast or a live stream, or by writing these things down in a book and having them all cited, is so much more legitimate than trying to answer someone's like in, you know, like 180 characters or whatever you have in a cat, you know, and then people are upset. They're like, why are you answering me? And you're like, because this answer is so much bigger than like a yes or a no or a like, you know, those types of interactions they're draining too, right? I'm sure you've faced this. To continue to make content at this level and put yourself out there is extremely mentally, physically exhausting in lots of ways. And it's weird too, because people are like, what do? You just post videos online? That doesn't seem like work. And you're like, well, it's actually like takes quite a bit of effort and like a lot of just self stuff to continue to put yourself out there when people are like, you know, I get accused of looking like, again, we are white privileged men. We have it really fucking easy compared to what women and people of color have to deal with online in terms of criticism and what people are like. Because again, we can pull white male privilege and be like, I know what the fuck I'm talking about. I have a PhD. I have a master's. And people can't really argue with that because you're like, I have credentials. But it's so much harder when you know, even when you have the credentials, but you are a woman or a person of color, they will attack you so much.
Yeah, no, you can. So for two things I think are important. Number one, like I agree with everything you're saying, but like, it doesn't matter what credential you. I've learned that's one of the reasons I don't really publish. Like I don't hide my credentials at all, but I don't talk about them.
You don't,
because number one,
them about
I don't want people. I want people to actually think about what I'm saying, and I don't want them to just say, okay, well, he has this degree and whatever, so therefore he's right. Which I don't think that's a good thing that everybody should do. It's just the way that I like to do it. I think
I don't normally answer people by saying I have a PhD. You know, it's just sometimes people
and therefore
like,
yeah.
Well, it's more like, well, what are your credentials? And I'm like, well,
yeah. But I also know from experience, especially if you're talking about like sex and gender, vaccines, climate change, like if it's a politicized topic, the credential sometimes makes it worse.
Because it's a wedge issue, and then they see you as just the opposite side of the wedge, and then they'll no longer listen to anything you have to say about it, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, okay, well, you're paid to say that. You lose funding if you don't say this. You won't get a grant if you don't say this. It's like you've been brainwashed by the education system,
right?
And so it's like that's one of the things where, like I mentioned earlier, like I want a PhD, but I've kind of had to come to terms with the fact that like a lot of the times PhD on the internet means you're correct, and that's dangerous for education. But it's also equally true to say there's a lot of fucking people that like it doesn't matter. Like I can't say many times, like, you're not a real biologist, you need a degree in biology. I have a few. Okay, well, you're not a real biologist because you need to publish research. I'm actually actively publishing research at this moment. You're not a real biologist because you don't have a degree in this particular area. Actually, you never studied humans. You're talking about sex and gender. You never studied humans. Second master's in biomed. I've got hundreds of hours of cadaveric to say. Like, I actually did a lot of studying humans. Right. Well, you're not. And it's just the goalpost moves somewhere else.
Do you have any photos of you like elbow deep inside of a cadaver? Because I feel like that would be a thing. If someone's like, you don't have me, you're like, no, like literally, here's the receipt.
Here's me holding this man's liver. No, you're not allowed. You're not allowed to take videos or photos or anything. You're also it is really interesting. You're not supposed to take photos or videos unless it's like super specific circumstances. Okay. Forgive me for the light changes, by the way. I'm sitting in front of my computer. I keep trying to like refresh it so that there's light hitting me.
Right, good.
But there is also, you're not supposed to know any personal information about the cadavers.
Right.
So like, their age and their cause of death. These like how old they were when they died and what they died of, the immediate cause of death. That's all you usually know, except in my case with this last one that I did. So this last clinical anatomy lab that I did, it's cadaver dissection lab, and they have a dedicated cadaver just for the graduate students. And so they have about 16 bodies laid out for the medical students, and each body has like 12 to 16 medical students working on it, like in rotations of like 4 at a time. And they come in like groups and do these things. And then they have the one for the graduate students. And so you have like 4 to 6 grad students who they work on this one body, and it needs to be fucking perfect. And you're just really, really, really detailed dissection. Every nerve, every tiny blood vessel, every little thing is just perfect. I was the only grad student that semester. Only one. And
so you did like a whole body yourself? Or...
I did an entire body. I spent about 20 hours a week on average for an entire semester just dissecting this one dude. And this one dude happened to have been a personal friend of the head of the department, who on his deathbed was like, dissect me, bro. And so we fucking did. And so everybody else doesn't know any personal information about their cadaver. And then I have Ron. And Ron was a microbiologist and was a firecracker of a man. And I know everything about Ron's life. And I know Ron's wife visited. And I'm fucking and it's just me and Ron for 20 hours a week for an entire semester. And I'm just peeling apart layer by layer of Ron's body. And that's the TAs knew and the professors knew. And so literally every day they're starting the day and they're like, all right, guys, table 13 has something really interesting. Table 2 has an interesting deviation of this thing. How's Ron doing for it? I'm like, Ron's great, guys.
Can I ask you, in mushroom stuff, there's a lot of not arguing, but like contention about potentially how people pronounce things. Yeah. Is it duodenum or duodenum?
It is duodenum, but every person I've ever heard I've never heard duodenum in my life, but I can also say that, as you know, in biology, we use a lot of Latin, we use a lot of Greek, and we say shit wrong. And so like, I also say like, if I'm talking about so you have DNA wraps around histones, and then that forms a rope, and then that rope forms a chromosome. That rope, that's called chromatin, unless you're talking to anybody else who says chromatin.
Chromatin, yeah. I worked on chromatin folding mutants for a long time, But yeah, I would. You said chromatin,
and I focus on. Yeah, exactly. You focused on chromatin folding, and I spent a semester studying chromatin remodeling, because that's how we say it in Oklahoma. And so like, or like niche and niche or whatever else, or GIF.
With the mushroom stuff, there's Latin is a dead language, and so in theory, if you want to pronounce it correctly, you pronounce it with a heavy Italian accent too, because that's Latin would have been. So this is Amanita muscaria. Some people say Amanita, depending on like if you're East Coast or West Coast or whoever your sort of mushroom teacher was. But if I went Amanita muscaria, you'd be like, that guy's an asshole. Like I can't. What are you like making fun of Italians? I'm like, no, Amanita muscaria. It's not gonna work. So I gotta like adjust my pronunciations. There's one fairly well-known mycologist his name's Alan Rockefeller, and we're constantly getting mistaken for each other because we're both kind of gingery. But when you're talking to him about mushrooms, he will regularly, like, I use fungi interchangeably, but he does that with all of the Latin names. So you'll just be talking to him, and in the same sentence, he'll call it by like Amanita versus Amanita, and you're just like, Alan, which one it is? He's like, I'm just saying them all because they're all, as long as it's phonetic, it's basically correct. And again, we're not saying things with a heavy Italian accent. Duodenum. I like. So I think, and again, I think people get really bent out of shape with the Latin because it seems so scary. But it's like, if you just say it phonetically, you and I can both figure out what someone's trying to say as long as it's like the syllables are there. You're like, you said chromatin, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure he means chromatin, but then you said it. I was like, okay, that's
no, I fucking don't. I mean chromatin, because that's the right way to say it. Yeah, no, that is actually right, and like that's. I can't tell you how many times people have like corrected me, like, "Oh, you mean this?" I'm like, "Yeah, but you got it though. You know what I meant. So we're just gonna deal with it. It's fine."
Right. Or especially if you're doing a live stream or a real presentation in person, if you mispronounce something, just keep going. Don't go back and
Just
spend
pretend.
like 4 times. Yeah, just pretend you said it right and keep going. Even if you like flubbed your words, just keep moving. That is the best advice I have on any public speaking
you
thing.
just speak through your degrees, and people will assume you're right, and it's fine.
I have a mouthful of marbles half the time, which is part of why when I see you doing that like in front of the camera thing, I'm like, I can't go more than about 30 seconds without like making a major flub and whatever I'm talking about. Because I have brain farts and I forget shit all the time. When I've done filming things, if someone's like, hey, can you do that exact same thing, but we're going to film you from this angle? I'm like, nope. I can't say the same thing. Or I can say something similar, but I literally cannot read you a script of the same. Even if I have a script, I'm like, I'm dyslexic, so my brain's just like, I'm gonna like mix these things up on you. I'm like, okay, that's all I can do, you know.
That is exactly like I have to like if I'm gonna make a video, if I'm doing something off the cuff, that's fine. But especially if I'm doing a presentation or if I'm doing a video, I've scripted out not just like the words, but the inflections and the hand gestures and the motion and everything like. And so like, if you ever want to thoroughly embarrass me and bore yourself, like I'll show you like some of my like behind the scenes footage where like if I'm recording a YouTube video, I'll have like 10 solid minutes of film that is me saying the exact same line over and over, the exact same way. Because one of these is perfect, and I do the exact same motion and the exact same play, and I get halfway through it, and then I stop and I do it again, and I do it again, and I do it again. It's like it has to be perfect with the and like that. I have to like act it out that way. Like the acting is so much more important.
I guess to some degree that's part of why I don't do that many like talking head videos, because if I can get it on the first try, great. If I don't, the more tries I do get worse and worse and worse, and by the end of it, I'm like, fuck it, I'm not gonna post this. So I'm like, I got one shot at it, and if I don't do it in one shot, then it's a fucking tapping and jiggling mushrooms because I don't have to be on camera. You know, like that's a luxury I have with my content.
I have learned that like if I've said the same line for long enough, I need to just say something else for a minute. Anything. Like if I can just say a different sentence for a second, because otherwise my body gets like trapped in this like weird logic loop where it just can't get through it, and I'll just flub the words over and over and over. And for some reason, like I don't know why, but some videos are just cursed. So like I can get, generally speaking, it takes me about an hour of filming for every 10 minutes of content that I actually release. Generally speaking.
That's a pretty good ratio. Like it takes me like an hour to make a 1 minute video.
It used to be that way because I used to record all of my stuff in one take, and so it was like I'm going to get this perfect, completely one take, and so it would take me about an hour to 90 minutes to make a TikTok. But now like I've gotten it down to where I can usually get through it about an hour per 10 minutes, and because it just takes me like 30 times of saying each line, and then it works. And some videos are just cursed where like I can't say a fucking thing. The Sex and Sensibility video, it was an hour and 40-minute long video. I have over 20 hours of footage of me fucking up over and I recorded for almost 4 days. And it just over and over and over and over on the same, and it was just cursed, and I don't know why. But
do you ever put those bloopers on your Patreon or anything like that?
No, not really. It's just awful. It's just if they were funny, maybe, but it's just awful.
Well, I've thought about that where I'm like, could I take a bunch of the videos that just like didn't work and make like a blooper reel, and then I watch it, I'm like, this just isn't compelling content. It's like if it was funny, it's one thing, but it can occasionally like. You know, I do occasionally get funny things, but more often than not, they're actually like included in a video, and I just decide to leave them in there. Where I'm like, it was me like popping slime molds, and I got it like all over my camera, all over my pants, and I'm just like, oh fuck, it's all over me. You know, it's like that's you put that in as an Easter egg in the end of a video kind of thing. But
that's a good. That's very good.
It's what's harder for me is
not being able to speak for an hour and a half is not a fun video.
Or I have a lot of footage who've been like, so this is blah 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 mushroom, and I give all the facts, and then later I'm like. Turns out it was the wrong mushroom. I completely flubbed every piece of information about this mushroom. And I'm like, well, that's unusable. Like, it's great footage, but it's like, I can't use the audio. And then I have to like, well, do I put this in a compilation and do a voiceover? Gets overwhelming. Before I don't want to keep you all day. So one of the things I wanted to ask you was, tell me what you know about mushrooms and fungi. Cause I want to explore the idea of like doing a collab video about it. But I want to hear like, before I tell you a bunch of shit, tell me what you know and what you think, because I'm like, you're an educated, learned person, and you know something about fungi, but like,
Something.
what do you know? Question mark.
So if I was gonna like do like an intro video about like what fungi are, I would
Hmm.
start by explaining that they're not plants. I would start with that.
Hmm.
I
Yes.
actually, you know
Yeah.
what? I would start with the hook of saying they're more closely related to you than a plant, because then people are gonna be like, okay, well, what the fuck is that?
It's a good hook.
Then
It's
I would
yeah.
explain. No, it was just because like they're strictly speaking, as far as I know, like they
Hmm.
are in their own kingdom, like that's a thing.
Hmm.
And the three
Yep.
kingdoms are, you can argue that they are each equally separate, but they are more close to animals in the way that like archaea are a little bit more eukaryote than bacteria. You know what I'm saying? Like yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yep.
exactly. It's kind of
There's your
slid to
little
the side.
diagram.
Perfect. Yes, exactly. And so like it's not there are these three kingdoms, but it's not a perfect split between these kingdoms. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
And so like I would start with that kind of thing just to kind of get people thinking. And then I would start talking about, okay, so why?
Hmm.
Let's talk about the history. And like we used to think these were plants because they grew like plants and they looked like plants and they more or less act like plants. But
Mm.
actually, let's talk about number one, they're heterotrophic. Number
Hmm.
two, we look at the cell walls of these things, and their cell walls are made of chitin, not cellulose. And what else uses chitin as a hard shell? Well, literally all arthropods do. And
Hmm.
so if you
Hmm.
eat mushrooms on your pizza, you're basically eating cockroach shells, is what that is. And like that's another hook that I can bring people in. You know, that's
Again,
what
I totally agree with that, but it's a good hook. It's a good hook.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And it doesn't have to be perfectly accurate. It has to be
Right,
perfectly
right,
exciting.
right. They both
And then
contain
we can get the
chitin.
accuracy later.
Yes.
Yeah. And chitin's cooler than all the other ones. And so then we can go from there into like talking about the idea of saying like trying to just talk about fungi as a unit is like
Hmm.
trying to talk about eukaryotes as a unit, or not even that, because also that's below it. Trying to talk about animals as a unit. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? If I
Right,
say animals do X,
right.
almost guarantee there's nothing that I can say animals do that you can't find a thing that's like, well, actually, here's an animal that does something else. Like it's
So
very difficult to do that.
the other one, this is like the start of a talk I give, which is essentially like overview of the book. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out like what are fundamental differences between animals versus plants versus fungi, and like what can I say that's not doesn't have an exception or isn't totally wrong. And here's my little like diagram in the book, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And it's set up so that plants are here, and here's like the fibers they use. So this is
Mm-hmm.
uh, cellulose and amylose. So like cellulose is like the
Mm-hmm.
structural one, amylose is how they store their energy, and then fungi and animals both use chitin as the structural one, and then glycogen as their energy storage. And then the other
Glycogen,
big
yeah.
glycogen, yeah. So that's the thing they have in common. A thing that's different between animals and fungi, and this is a really important one, is that fungi are osmotrophic, which meaning they digest externally, whereas all animals are
Oh shit.
phagotrophic in that they take it inside. And so that is like when you're
Yeah.
looking fundamentally, what's the difference? Is fungi live in their food and digest externally. Animals don't. I mean, they can live in food, but generally they're eating and digesting inside.
Yeah,
And the
yeah,
big
yeah.
difference there that I like to set up for people is when you think about fungi, that means in a microbial sense, they're like environmental engineers. So like, you know how like elephants in the savannah completely change the makeup of plants when they go through and like, parade,
Yeah.
stampede through an area kind of thing. So fungi are like
Yeah.
that, but at a microbial level, because they're constantly excreting enzymes and changing the pH and the redox balance. And like, they're essentially cultivating the microbiome of everything else that grows around them. So I always say that like fungi set the table for everyone else to come eat. So in the basis of literally any ecosystem, from terrestrial to aquatic to even our skin and our stomachs, there's not as many fungi present like in our bodies as there are bacteria, but they are fundamental to the composition and the activity of everything else that follows. And that's once you get
So you're
people
talking
set up with
about
that in their heads. Yeah. Go ahead.
no, well, no, I was just thinking, like, if you incorporate that and you're like, okay, so what's the hook then for like a thing on fungi? Is like fungi are the backwards eating, almost animal, not plants that just so happen to be responsible for like all life on land. because without them colonizing land, we wouldn't have been able to have plants, which means we wouldn't have been able to have herbivores, which means we wouldn't have had predators on land, so we wouldn't have had any of this.
Right. There's a phrase that's pretty common said by a big mushroom guy. It says, mushrooms will save the world. And I hate that because if you look at it,
they already did.
We live in a fungal world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like fungi can help us, but they are the basis of our entire, and just like you said, like terrestrial life basically only exists because of what fungi were able to do. And a lot of that started with lichens, which again, if we talk about lichens as a subsect of fungi and life in general, lichen is one of those weird things where, like, again, going back to like when they thought fungi were plants, lichens were part of that confusion. But lichens were also the first thing that showed symbioses, because everything before that was that white male biologists said that everything was in constant fighting competition. And it took a woman to come along and be like, hey, actually, there's a thing where things get along and live synergistically called symbiosis. And all the men were like, no, that can't be true. And then she wanted to know
it's
about
all about dominance.
Yes.
It's funny you mentioned earlier on, you were talking about like the privilege that we have as white dudes on the internet of like people tend to assume that we're right. I talked earlier about how like I'm only 3 semesters away from a psychology degree. I don't know if you follow Dr. Roxanne Filig here on TikTok. She goes by Naya Papaya. But she's fantastic. And I was talking to her. She just finished her PhD a year, I think, ago. In social psychology, and I was telling her how excited I am because I can go now, if I get this bachelor's in psychology, people will start tagging me in her comments asking if what she's saying is true.
And you're like, she's a PhD. Like,
it'll happen though. It's because it happens all the time. There's another creator here named Chemical Kim, and she is a PhD chemist, and she's fucking awesome. Yeah, she's super nice, and she's so nice. So I've met her in person a couple times. She's a super nice lady. And she had this video where she was demonstrating the Leidenfrost effect, and she has like this like beaker of liquid nitrogen, and she's pouring it on her hand and showing like, okay, so when this hits my hand is so hot relatively, there's this thin layer of vapor, and it protects my hand from freezing, and this is the Leidenfrost, this is how it works. And someone tags me in her videos like, is this true? I'm like, number one, she is so much more qualified than me. Number two, she's fucking showing you. She's doing it in front of you.
Demonstrating.
And explaining the difference. And you're like, but where is the man who tells me if it's true?
What do they call it? The Hank Green effect, or the Hank Green problem? It's like, I'm tagging Hank Green in any science video, and Hank's like, this person knows more about the subject than I do. You shouldn't be evoking. I've had the same thing when like people have tagged me in Gabrielle or Alexis's video, and I'm like, they know their mushroom stuff. I don't need to come in and comment anything. Occasionally I'll come in and like give a Latin binomial just if it's required, but like,
right.
For the most part, there's a lot of smart people making smart content on the internet. There is the issue of people who don't know what they're doing, making content about stuff that they don't really know. And in those cases, you can also very graciously and very kindly help redirect, because most of the time they're not entirely wrong. It's maybe they're just missing a few key details, something like that. And so there's ways to be empathetic and kind with the way you give feedback. That's not just like, you're an idiot, don't do this. You're like, you're clearly on your educational journey and you're learning. And this can be a good learning experience that you draw like the chance to say, hey, maybe when I make videos, I should like double check my facts just before I go ahead and make the video kind of thing. But again, that's an issue.
The amount of times that I go back and fact check shit that I have learned 1,000 years, like the literally like freshman level stuff. And I'm just like, you know what though? Just in case, I don't want to look this foolish and I don't want to spread misinformation. I'm going to take a second. And then you have on the opposite end of the coin, some fucking chiropractor who's like, you know what though? I drank a kale smoothie, so I don't need a flu shot this year. And it's like, bro, I can't believe that we have to exist on the same internet. There should be a separate internet for you.
Yeah, chiropractors are especially bad. And it's crazy to me that people don't know that chiropractors are like more often than not like kind of charlatans. And like I hate to point a finger at the end. Not all of them. A lot of them. But a lot of them. It is a more often than not, you're like, oh, the anti-vax person who's a doctor is actually a chiropractor. Like,
right. To color me surprised.
Yeah, it's a thing. Okay, let's get back to fungi. So you were saying fungi are non-plant sort of animals. Let me show you my little
that eat backwards
thing in the book. Where is it? The evolutionary. I have an evolutionary timeline that I thought was kind of cool, because one of the interesting things, most interesting things to me about the evolution of fungi is that it went. Whoop, TikTok wants me to prove I'm still on here. There we go. Drag the puzzle piece. Where's taxonomy? Is evolution next? Where's evolution in the book? God, it's crazy. You write a book and you feel like you know everything in there, and then suddenly
it's just a mess.
Don't remember everything is. But I guess I don't even really show. Here it is. Timeline. Okay, timeline. So fungi are on this line and plants are on this line. And what I'm trying to show this is essentially that like fungi and plants co-evolved. So they were like most relationships on this planet, they were like originally antagonistic, but the way that like pathogenicity works over time is things become less pathogenic because it doesn't behoove you to kill your host. Instead, it almost at some point starts making sense that you're like working with them. Thus was the genesis of like mycorrhizal relationships, in that fungi, the original sort of metabolic mode of most fungi is to parasitize stuff. And we get back to like the basal lineages of fungi were actually little swimmy, like protista looking things, chytrids, and often they'll have a motile tail. So again, that whole thing about fungi aren't motile. Well, actually the original fungi were motile and they lived in water and they're still there. In fact, fungi are a bigger and bigger part of all the aquatic ecosystems. Every time we look at them, we're like, actually, turns out there's a lot of fungi here. We don't really know what they're doing, but they're probably parasitic and they're probably saprotrophic, and they might even be symbiotic, but we don't actually have like evidence to that effect yet. And so thinking about fungi gets really complicated because, like you said, there's nothing really true statement you can make in the same way about animals. You can't say one thing that's like generally true. And that's why I got to the osmotic versus like phagotrophic thing, because the external versus internal digestion is one of the few things you can say, okay, these are fundamentally different. Plants are fundamentally different because they're autotrophic versus heterotrophic, making their own food versus eating their own food. But it is really interesting. You look at the history of the evolution of plants, and it mirrors almost step in step the evolution of fungi and also the diversification of fungi. Like when angiosperms came along and you got flowering plants, oh my God, you suddenly got a huge burst in the diversity and evolution of fungi. And that's a thing that I think a lot of people are stuck up on the idea that like fungi came from outer space, partially because Paul Stamets said it. We don't have any evidence for that. There's literally no evidence for that. There's the idea that you can send lichens to space and they can exist in space for like 3 months. But that just speaks to how resilient lichens are, because after 3 months, you bring them back in and you pour water over them and they come back to life. And they go, cool, they can go dormant for literally like hundreds of years and then get water and be back to it. So they can survive the vacuum of outer space. But that doesn't mean that they came from outer space, because we don't have any evidence from like...
That's like no different than like pollen or like a lot of seeds. Like they found like plant pollen and seeds and shit that are like thousands of years old. And as long as they're preserved properly and dehydrated properly, they just spring right back. And no one's making that claim about them because it's not as fun as a mushroom, where it's like, oh, a mushroom and an octopus, they're so weird, so it must be aliens. It's just it's that and the aquatic ape theory and shit. It's just things like fungi and humans and octopuses and all these things where it's like it's something that people can snatch onto and make it sound crazier than it is. But no one's gonna say that about a fucking palm tree. I mean, no one's gonna be like, oh yeah, maybe that pine tree is an alien. It's like no one cares. No. But a mushroom, ooh. Yeah, it's exciting.
So it makes it a more compelling story, but it's just untrue. And that's one of those difficult things. Is like, where do you draw the line between like sensationalism to get views and get people excited about a subject versus like where you actually get to teach them? And that's where that comment thing versus like
accuracy,
writing a book or doing a whole video is.
It's the line.
I agree. I mean, that's part of why I wrote this book. Because I was like, I need to actually put out the right version of this information, because the predominant person in my educational space is constantly quoting misinformation and is on Joe Rogan saying the most out-of-pocket shit. And people are like, but what's wrong with Joe Rogan? And I'm like, everything.
A lot. Turns out, It turns out it doesn't matter how good of an interviewer you are. Being a good interviewer doesn't mean just letting literally anybody say literally anything unchecked and then broadcast it to your hundreds of millions of listeners who don't know how to fact check because you don't know how to fact check. Like, oh my God, it's fucking, you don't, I get grumpy about that shit so fast. Because people are like, well, why don't you want these opinions out there? Just because you disagree with them, you should let the opinions be out. Sure, let their opinions be out there. Don't legitimize these opinions by putting them on a major broadcast where they're not fact checked at all. or you have the guy who is also pushing like similar or worse conspiracy theories, and that's the guy who's fact checking you. Like I don't get it, man. By the way,
you mentioned it earlier.
Well, I was going to say we had a parasitologist that I saw in the chat down here.
Cool.
What's your favorite parasite?
That's a great question. What's your favorite parasite?
I've got a few.
There's for me. Oh God. I mean, Toxin Plasma gondii is a pretty interesting one because I've been like a cat owner my whole life. I don't even know what it is, but when I was talking about chytrids, there's a kit, and this is one of the things I was going to bring up in your sex and reproduction. I was like, I'll wait till we have a chance to have a conversation about it. But there's chytrids out there. So these are little swimmy aquatic fungi with motile tails, and their general life strategy is they'll latch on to like an algae or a small protist kind of thing, and they'll latch on. And they grow, it's not true hyphae, true fundamental, like filamentous networks, but they grow things that are sort of like little hairs to absorb nutrients. So they latch onto the outside, they grow little hairs inside, and then they suck nutrients out. Or sometimes they embed themselves inside the algae, and then they just like grow stuff inside and grow and take over the algae. But there's one that the spores end up being like little harpoons. So the harpoons go out and shoot themselves into another algae and then like grow a new one and then take over the algae, kind of like a virus, like reproducing inside of it, and then shoot out more harpoon spores. And I was like, that's an insane, like it's like a parasitic hunting fungi that can swim and eats other things. And I'm like, and I don't even know the name of this freaking chytrid, but like this is happening all the time in liquid and water all over the world. And we don't even think about that. And that's what fungi are doing.
Yep.
Here's a hunting, eating fungi that this is animal behaviors we usually associate with animals, and here's a fungi doing it. And again, if you want to get back to like how fungi and animals are different, like we go back to basal lineages, well, they're not actually that different. In fact, a lot of things are kind of this weird gray area. Microsporidia, there's all this stuff that there's a bunch of fungi that are sister fungi, but they're not true fungi because they don't contain chitin, and because they do phagocytose their food, they do eat. And so you're like, well, they're not technically fungi, but they're still genetically like almost fungi. So parasites.
I love that.
What are your favorite parasites?
I've got several. So if you go to my YouTube channel, everybody watching, I've got actually a tier list of some of my favorite parasites from
is it on like a playlist kind of thing, or is it a post?
It's not a playlist. It's actually just a single video where I did those tier list videos were popular at the time, where you like rank thing from like S through D tier, and so I ranked like 30 or so parasites that I loved, and they're all animal parasites, of course. But I would say if I had to have like a top list, Giardia lambila, I believe, because they're just fucking cute. They're adorable little, like they look like little stingrays with suction cup faces, and they just want to live in your intestines and give you diarrhea. That's all they want to do.
Right. They just want to get your duodenum.
Right there in your duodenum. Yeah. So duodenum, and then that connects to your jejunum, and then that connects to your ileum, which is this super long part.
Say the middle one. What was it?
Ileum.
No, I know the ileum.
Ileum.
You said it when it started with a J.
Jejunum.
Jejunum. I have not heard of that before. What's a jejunum?
That's the middle part of your small intestine.
Okay, gotcha.
So your duodenum is pretty short, and then that connects to your jejunum, and then that connects to the ileum, which is the main bulk of it. And we always remembered that by referring to your whole thing as DJ ileum, which is fucking a sick spinning, whatever. I don't know. But like what was I talking about? Yeah, it's these little dudes. They just want to live in your intestines, and they just want to slurp up some of your fluids, and they just want to give you a little bit of diarrhea. They're cute.
Just
and then on the opposite end of the spectrum, and they're adorable, and like that. So on the opposite end of the spectrum is Leishmania brasiliensis, which is one of the scariest parasites that I know of. They're freaky as all shit. I believe they're trypanosomes. I could be wrong. They have like their little body and the little flagellum. I'm not going to say they're trypanosomes because I don't remember for sure, and I don't want to spread misinformation. But I know for sure they're little, like almost football, like a football shape that you pull a little bit. So they're like elongated footballs with little tails on the ends. And the first time I saw them was in a parasitology lab in my undergrad, and they gave me a blood smear. And I'm looking through these blood. I'm like, this just looks like blood. There's nothing here. And I realized that it looks staticky. and I zoom in more, and there's like 50 of these around every single blood cell. They're tiny. And you get them, you go to South America, and you get bitten by whatever, I think it's a sand fly or something like this, and you get these things in your bloodstream, and then you go home, and you don't know anything's wrong for like 10 years. You're just living, and it's fine. And then
it's like
one day,
most of the time,
and then one day, randomly, the bottom half of your face just starts melting off because now you have mucocutaneous leishmaniasis, and every mucous membrane in your head is now just destroyed, and this all just rots away, and your face falls off, and that's fucking leishmaniasis. There's different kinds of leishmaniasis. There's visceral leishmaniasis, there's dermal leishmaniasis, mucocutaneous leishmaniasis, fucking terrifying. And it's caused by Leishmania brasiliensis, which is another one of my favorite parasites because they scare the fuck out of me. I love them.
Wow. I mean,
don't look them up. Don't look it up.
This is now reminding me of maybe it's a Radiolab episode. So there was some guy who got stung by like one of those bot flies, but he was like an entomologist. So instead of getting the bot fly treated, he brought it home with him to like incubate it. And then he had like a whole bot fly, and I was like, oh, dude, like hard pass. No thanks. Like.
Yep. I love those guys. And then the cestodes, also tapeworms, freak me the fuck out in a good way though. Because one of the coolest things about tapeworms is that they are really, really good at living in your intestines, but they can also sometimes bore right through your intestinal lining and get loose inside your body cavity. And they can swim around in there, and they know they're not supposed to be there, so then they insist, and they form what's called a hydatid cyst, which is just this ball of membrane with some worm inside, and the worm's just kind of turned off, and you just have this growing ball
like
of membrane.
What Aang did in Avatar when he turned into a big ball of ice.
Yeah.
In the sea, but worms do that inside of you.
Exactly. And you can look them up online of really cool videos of people removing from their fucking brain. They open up their skull and they're not attached to anything. You just pump water and they just float right out. And you just have this like softball size, perfectly spherical membrane bound worm thing. And just this perfect like hole in your brain where this guy was living. And it didn't eat anything. It just lived there and fucked you up. And that's freaky as shit to think about. So check that out. Don't look that up either, unless you want to. But yeah, dude, they're a lot of fun.
Wow. I'm trying to think. So in my book, I had a couple of things on different mycoparasites. So these are both like versions. Have you heard of a lobster mushroom before?
No.
Okay, so
I've heard of lion's mane mushroom, which supposedly tastes like lobster. That's all I've got.
Yeah, it was a lion. So lion's mane is hericium. So a lobster mushroom is interesting because it's a base species of it's called Russell brevipes, sort of a large, relatively uninteresting white mushroom. And it gets infected by a mold called Hypomyces lactiflorum. And the mold it does what's called parasitic castration of the mushroom. So the mushroom really has gills underneath. Horrible. And instead the entire thing gets coated in this like reddish orange mold that transforms the first couple centimeters, like completely changes the gene expression, the metabolism, everything. It just hijacks the entire mushroom, completely like covers up the gills and turns the entire surface of this mushroom into a spore production factory for the mold. And then part of that is that lobster mushrooms generally taste better than the base host species. So they become like a positive thing that people actually want to eat. But there's a whole bunch of different kinds of hypomyces. So there's like, the lobster mushroom is a red one, but there's this like yellow one called Ludiovirescens. There's one that specifically infects amanitas, and so this one kind of turns like amanitas and section validae into these weird little things. But those are all like ascomycete molds that are mycoparasites. But there's also a bunch of basidiomycete things that are mycoparasites. So here's one that like it takes a big old dead like rotten russula and forms all these like little power cap mushrooms on top. And here's a bolete that grows parasitically on earth balls. So there's all sorts of interesting versions of like mycoparasitism, where things, again, it's like that co-evolution of stuff. And sometimes it's like all negative, and sometimes it's like maybe negative mixed with some positive. There's also things like microheterotrophs. This is a great one to talk about if you're thinking about like fungi and plants and the different relationships there. Like microheterotrophs are plants that have completely lost the ability to do photosynthesis. Like they don't even have the genes to do photosynthesis or produce chlorophyll. Instead, they're wholly dependent on parasitizing the carbon coming from the mushroom mycelium. And again, in classical biology, it's been like, well, this is a pure parasite. And as we look at more like ecological roles in mixed forests, we're like, oh, it turns out when there's mycoheterotrophs present, there's like a higher concentration of like fungal diversity around the root balls of these microheterotrophs. And so like maybe they're actually selecting for certain types of fungi, which might be beneficial to the forest as a whole, and they play a role in disturbance ecology. So it's like all of these things, even on the human body, you know, a yeast infection, right? Candida causes yeast inflammation. You can get little like redness around your mouth, or like, God forbid, a yeast infection down there. Those candida are like the bouncers at a club. So your club is better to have a bouncer out front than no bouncer. And occasionally the bouncer comes inside and starts a fight, and you're like, okay, bouncer's kind of an asshole. But it's better to have them out front than not have them out front, because something else is going to come in otherwise. So candida are like the bouncers at all of our orifices. So all of our ears, eyes, nose, all of our holes all around our body have candida there. And it gets out of balance when like the microbial balance gets out of whack. And then there's all this stuff like tyrosol and different types of alcohol quorum signaling that like makes them shift from being a sort of benign yeast form into this invasive pathogenic form. And that's the crazy thing about fungi, is they shift form and function that same way, and they're like super opportunistic. And that's one of the things a lot of people don't think about or recognize with fungi, is how just they're ready to kind of spring and do what they want to do, because we as humans tend to view everything through this very like anthropogenic way of looking at the world. It's like, what does it do for me? Or how do I interact with this? And fungi are just different. They just exist for themselves. And humans have a hard time wrapping their brain around the fact they're like, this mushroom just exists because it's a mushroom, not because it has a purpose, not because it's medicinal, not because it's edible. It's just a fucking mushroom. But even like, what is a mushroom? Because mushrooms, like all fungi, or like all mushrooms are fungi, but not all fungi are mushrooms. Because I was just talking about Kitrad's little swimmy thing. So there's a whole bunch of things. There's even mushrooms that in one form are a mushroom, and another form they're a lichen or a mold, or like all sorts of these like shifting things. I think I wrote a little bit about like anamorphic versus teleomorphic. But it's like the different amount of genetic information. And basically it's like a sperm and an egg in our bodies can't live outside of our bodies, right? Our gametes are not viable on their own. But fungal gametes, as an asexual clonal version, can be. And so they can just like go out and start new mycelium. And later on in life, they can meet up with the complementary mycelium and then like form a mushroom again. But on their own, they can live a completely different lifestyle as a mold or like a parasite or something that you would not think about. And then later on, they go to form a mushroom or something more recognizable, which is just like a mind-bending thing. And they do this all opportunistically, because it's like whatever fits their agenda.
That's all going in the video then. I mean,
yeah, well, I was going to say, this is all stuff I want to like talk about. It's also like the differences there between ascomycetes versus basidiomycetes is another one a lot of people miss. So I have two little things to like illustrate my point. So basidiomycetes are a majority of like mushrooms that you know, the cap and stem mushrooms, polypores, anything you've probably eaten, even a lion's mane, is a basidiomycete. And that means they have spores on a basidia, which is sort of a club-like structure with the spores being produced on the end. And then that's that basidia would hang down from like the gills of a mushroom, and those spores are being released off into the air. Ascomycetes are the other big phyla of mushroom producing fungi, but ascomycetes produce less recognizable mushrooms. So it's stuff like morels, cordyceps, truffles. A lot of the yeasts and non-mushroom fungi are also ascomycetes, but almost like 98% of all lichens are ascomycetes. So if you look at lichens, they produce little cups, and that's like the fungal reproduction part of a lichen, is those little cups on a lichen. And that's very similar to other ascomycete fungi that form little cups. The other sort of basic form they make, and like even a morel is essentially a collection of little cups, you know, all in the top of this like honeycomb shape kind of thing. But the other type of form they make are what are called flasks. And that's when it's sort of like there's tissue, and inside the tissue, there's a little flask down here holding the spores, or my faces. And that's like what the Hypomyces lactiflorum does. So it coats this mushroom in a red mold, and there's lots of these little dots called parathecia, and all those dots are full of spores that are then getting dispersed. So like that difference between ascos versus basidios is a big one, just in terms of getting people to like recognize different forms of fungi as mushrooms, and then also like opening their brain to what are the other forms that those things can be, because they can be yeast, they can be molds, they can be little swimmy aquatic things. There's so many forms that fungi take that it's not just mushrooms. There's so much more to it. And that's kind of like the gray area where people are like, we've only categorized about 5% of fungi, which is insane because we've categorized maybe 90% of like plant and animal biodiversity, but we're only at like 5% of the understanding of the total fungal biodiversity on our planet. which is
Yeah.
really scary too when we look at like the loss of habitat and biodiversity due to climate change. Like we're missing all of this stuff that we didn't even know was there, and we don't know if we're missing the cure to cancer or something else that would be really important.
So like here's my thoughts then.
Yeah,
Two
yeah,
things.
shoot.
Number one, you should start a Q&A column about mushrooms, and I'll call it Ask a Mycetes. Second of all,
That's great.
is that the video then, if we're gonna make for those who are curious, this all started because Gordon and I were talking about like maybe like collabing on a video on YouTube and like doing a cool thing about fungi, and it sounds like that's what's gonna happen, which I'm very into. The video, I think I'm gonna call it then Misunderstanding Fungi, like understanding fungi with miss in parentheses in the corner, and like covering this history of thought about them, starting with, we thought these things were plants, here's why they're fucking not. We thought these things were simple in their reproduction, here's why they're fucking not. We thought these things were simple in their a trophy, here's why they're not. Here's why, and like just breaking down just how different and unique, and then ending on that concept of we're fundamentally talking about here is these anthropogenic dualisms where we're like, or anthrocentric dualisms where we're thinking, like you said, about like there's no such thing as symbiosis until we prove that there is. And to say, okay, well, this thing has to have some sort of function, some sort of utility. Actually, it has its own way of living that's just, it doesn't seem to have the same interests that you do. And that may be why it's so successful. And like thinking of it that way and kind of helping people to understand a little bit more of the philosophy of biology in that sense, because a lot of people think in terms of economics when they should be thinking in terms of biology. And so like that, I think, would be a productive way to structure that video. And
yeah, I know. I love that. If
you're watching this now on Gordon's channel and that isn't what the video is, it's because we came up with something better. But like, if it is what the video is, then you saw it here first. That's, you're welcome for you saw the thought process here as we came up with this.
That's great. This is fun because I just thought you and I would have a fun time like workshopping, and other people might enjoy getting to hear the discussion. So it's not just us on the phone. There's like people here who are contributing to the discussion. We've talked about parasitism. We've talked about being elbow deep in cadavers. I mean, there's all sorts of interesting things that have been discussed, and that's why I enjoy getting to talk to you, because I feel like I'm not in grad school anymore, so I don't get to hang out with PhD students and drink beer and bullshit about people's projects. Instead, my peers become the people I see on the internet. And instead of just having a one-sided parasocial relationship, sometimes you can reach out and create like actual social relationships, even though we haven't had a chance to meet in person, but hopefully someday we do. So,
Not yet. If I ever make it up, I was in the closest I've ever come as I was in San Francisco for like that long.
Right. I think it was like you texted me. You met up with Laughter and Light or something, right? That was.
I met up with Laughter and Light, and also Sarah Ostad and others. Just like we had a little science communicator rumble, and we all went to the museum. Fucking missed you, but like, we'll do something. I'm sure we'll find some way for me to come visit, somewhere in the Northwest. I know Seth up there lives up in that way as well. So like we do some sort of like big, like just science nerd get together.
Well, if your mushroom video does very well, which I'm hoping it would do, then maybe you can like finance yourself a trip.
Our mushroom video.
Our mushroom, yes. Have you made YouTube work for you? Like I feel like people are compelled to want to listen to you discuss things for a while. I have had issues with making compelling long form content that has enough of a narrative to keep people watching. So like I've mastered short form. And I can sit there and wildly tap mushrooms for a minute, but like getting people to watch a 20-minute video has been more challenging. And it's partially because I don't make a lot of content like that. But I feel like you've successfully made the jump, right?
Yeah. So YouTube is my primary like source of income.
Your platform.
It's where I do my focus, and like I have an order of magnitude more followers here on TikTok, but my videos do worse. I don't fucking get paid. I have no control over my content. It gets pulled down randomly. I'm not free to talk about whatever I want to talk about because the algorithm sucks and different words get flagged because TikTok is significantly better at suppressing small businesses than it is at suppressing like white supremacy and hate speech and shit. So if you have literal like Nazi shit in your profile and everything, there's not a big issue. But if you say the words link in my bio or go to my merch store or find me on another platform, your video tanks. Literally, I have gotten like swastika merch recommended to me in the fucking merch store pop-up like TikTok shop thing. And it's like, I report it and they're like, oh, you liked it because you clicked on it? Here's 10 more things.
Yeah.
It's like,
you engaged with this content? You're like, no, I get a lot of videos for...
I had to learn that. Even if you are engaging with content to report it as dangerous, it counts as engagement and they think you like it. And it's insane. And then it gets a boost. And so, like, I've just kind of stopped fucking with TikTok, and I post here. I used to post here like 2 to 3 times a week. Now I post like 2-3 times a month. And I
noticed your
periodicity
went way down. When it sort of seems you're taking stuff from YouTube and and I think that's smart.
Mm-hmm.
I just can't bring myself to make the kind of content. Like my creativity process is often like, I'm going to log onto TikTok and see if I can just poop out like a short video. And I miss the days when short videos were actually monetized, because now to get a video monetized has to be over a minute. And that means I have to then create a longer video, and just inherently longer videos don't get as many views. So, I mean, I make probably an equivalent amount of money off TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook each month, but it's like $20 to $40 unless something goes viral, in which case it can be more.
Right.
But you don't really get to choose when things go viral. So that's why I've looked at like the long form content format on YouTube and said, man, if I could just publish like 1 or 2 good long form videos a month that people would actually watch, I could make probably enough to pay my mortgage. But I don't. And that's where I'm like, I really should do this. So I like talking to people who've successfully made the jump, but it's, as you said, it's a lot of time and a lot of effort to make a video. You have 20 plus hours of footage for an hour and a half video, right? So
it's definitely, it's a different animal entirely than TikTok is, both in terms of production and also in terms of like audience response and like how to grow it is so much harder to grow an audience on YouTube than it is on TikTok. Like it takes so much more effort to get people to just click the fucking subscribe button. But the people who are there, it's harder to lose them. And they tend to be more engaged and more like people want to let them participate a little bit more. You have a better community there. And the community that you build is typically a little bit more homogenous in like their interests and stuff. And so like it's kind of cool in those ways. It's just you can't treat it like TikTok, because if you do, it won't work.
But I mean, it has to be to some degree, because I've done short form on YouTube, and when it blows up, then it's like TikTok. Except the problem is my audience is all short form, so I don't have anyone who's used to watching me talk. So sorry.
And there's these like I was gonna say there are microcosms that you can kind of attract. I'm having a hard time doing short form because I look at all my old TikToks and I just don't like them anymore. And so like I'm sure that I could push them all over there and it'd be something, but they're just not fun for me anymore, and so I don't want to do it. But like on your
most
YouTube,
successful ones were always debunking stuff, which you're doing now, but you're doing in a much more like a better format for your mental health and as a teaching tool, right? So
it also needs to be more positive for me, because like I don't want my entire image online being the guy who gets mad at people and tells them why they're stupid and all, you know what I mean? I don't want to do that. And so like I've been putting out more and more content that's like travel vlogs and deep dives into a particular science topic, and those videos never ever do as well as when I'm like, hey, here's this creationist saying some dumb racist shit, here's why they're dumb and racist, you know what I mean? That video is gonna blow up and I'm gonna get a great time, I'm gonna get a paycheck, and I'm gonna get a lot of subscribers. It's gonna be great.
You feel pigeonholed by that. Like, I know I feel pigeonholed by the fact that I'm like, all right, well, what I grew up for is like tapping mushrooms and fingering mushrooms. And I'm like, but I have a PhD in biochemistry, I wrote a book, goddammit, but no one cares because all they want to see me do is, jiggle jelly fungi.
You definitely will paint yourself into a corner a lot more quickly on YouTube than you will on TikTok for sure. And that's something that you have to be concerned about. My big thing, like, I think Aaron Hansen, who's the guy who runs the Game Grumps and other things, but he's super famous, old school YouTuber. He always said, do parody and reaction shit until you get your first 100,000, and then you can do whatever you want. And that is what worked for me. Is like I did unboxing, I did science kit reviews. Didn't do anything. My first sex and gender video didn't do anything until I got bigger, and then I had to remake it. But like Reacteria, looking at other people's videos and then making content out of that content, blew up. And so like, if you can find a way to do that, I think that would be pretty good. And then also, while you're doing it, so you don't paint yourself into that corner, be making other content of saying like, okay, so today we're just going to take 10 to 20 minutes and talk about this type of fungus or this type of fungal like life strategy or this type of reproductive strategy or this particular family of mushrooms or this particular whatever it may be. And so that way you don't feel like you're so trapped. Because right now, that's how I'm at. I love making Reacteria. I really, really do. I don't want my every fucking video to be Reacteria. And so I'm trying to do this new series called Biologic, where I just teach introductory biology and like, here's what you need to know. And because I'll make so many videos where people are like, hey, thanks so much for talking about protein evolution. What's a protein? Well, let's talk about, And so, like, I want to have that base level. And I've made 2 videos of that last summer, and people really liked it. It got shit views, but the people who really liked it really appreciated it. So if I can make more videos to get shitty views and really help people, I'll be a lot happier than if I make a few videos that pay the bills and a million people like, but I'm not making the world a better place. I'm just saying creationism is dumb, and everyone's like, yeah, I know. You know what I mean? Yeah. So that's what I would recommend. Listen, I think you and I are of the same cloth in that way.
I've done that with my podcast, and when I did my podcast, I recorded every episode simultaneously, like via podcast platform, but also on YouTube, which is great because the podcast platform got bought out by Rumble, which is like the alt-right version of YouTube. And so they were like, do you want to come join our platform? And I was like, no, I don't want to be on the same platform as Andrew Tate and Tucker Carlson and, Jordan Peterson, et cetera, toxic male identity stuff. So all my podcast is still on YouTube. It's still up on Spotify, but I think I got taken down from like Google and Apple, but it's on Spotify, thankfully. But I can't broadcast anything new via an RSS feed. So like the podcast itself is sort of like an interesting little time capsule. Again, I can still make new YouTube episodes, but if it doesn't go anywhere else, then it kind of feels like it's just like a little mini circle jerk. But I think to your point, is like making something and putting it out there. And even if it's a small audience, I get like 900 views on a video. I do hear from people that my podcast is a thing that has like changed their view. And even the podcast was essentially, I did it while I was like writing the book. And so a lot of the ideas that are in here are reflected as early iterations of what I was trying to talk through on the podcast. And that is now like ensconced in the book kind of thing. And also to one of your earlier
Good
points,
use of the word ensconced, by the way.
Thank you. I spent entirely too much time studying vocabulary for the GREs, and now I just use a lot of fancy words. But what I love about vocabulary is it gives you the capacity to be so selective and specific with the way that you address things. Instead of just being like, it's very good, you can be like, it's phenomenal. Like it gives you so much more power as a speaker. And also as someone who's dyslexic, I constantly forget what the fuck I'm saying. And so having a large lexicon of stuff to draw upon is like, okay, this word means kind of the same thing. Go.
Yep.
It's helpful. But I've wanted to do an updated like podcast episode where I kind of do a long form, emotional, like empathetic, thought out response to the haters, basically. Because kind of like you said, you already know all of the negative feedback you're going to get. To some degree on any given video, the pushback points that people are going to have. And I know sort of the same thing for me. It's like, people are like, you're destroying nature by picking mushrooms. I'm like, no, it's fine. Or like, they think that picking versus cutting is like better or worse. There's data that says it really doesn't matter. So there's this huge slew of things, even like a lot of the things that Paul Stamets said on Joe Rogan, that I'm like, every time I go live, people are like, is this true? I'm like, no, Paul was just sort of making shit up, or like didn't know what he was talking about, or was stating opinion as fact. And I've been wanting to do, maybe a series would be better than just a straight podcast episode, but that same idea of like, can I put out answers to questions that people are constantly, confusing? So then in the comments, instead of trying to write out a comment, I could just be like, here's a link to the video where I explain the exact misconception that you have, in a very well thought out and kind, empathetic, a way that doesn't disrespect the person. Because again, when people give you shitty, mean feedback, I'm always tempted to be kind of a dick back to them. And that doesn't look good because it's like punching down. And it's difficult over time. What I've started doing is sometimes I'll type out like a saucy response, take a screenshot, and then just delete the whole thing and be like, all right, I don't need to put that energy out into the world. But I had the audacity to write it and then remember it. But
that gets it out of your head at least.
You said you don't want to get stuck in the cycle of making reaction videos to debunking stuff because you're like, I want to put out good information, but I don't want to constantly just be like feeding this cycle of reactivity and negativity. It's like better to keep it on the positive educational side. And like, I remember being on your show and I really liked the way that you handled people who, I forget, there was some dude who just, he was so out of pocket with his beliefs. And he also, you caught him in like a logical fallacy where he just couldn't make sense of it, but he stuck to his guns. And you were like, look, man, like we can't really have a discussion if you agree with me that you are wrong, but you're still like convinced that you are right, even though you've admitted you're wrong. Essentially. And you did it in a very kind way, but you're like, dude, we can't really keep talking if you were just completely in another reality, you know?
Yeah. No, I know exactly what you mean. I don't remember that call, but I've had to have that talk with people before. Where one of my favorite things to ask people is like, okay, we get to a certain point, I'm like, do you care about whether or not the things you believe are true? And they're like, well, I guess not. I'm like, okay, well then why? What are we? I'm not going to talk to you anymore. There's no reason to continue. Yeah. I actually, speaking of which, it is now 5:30 my time, and I've got a show at 7, so I've got to go prep for that. But like, thank you for chatting with me, my dude.
Yeah, dude.
And hanging out for a while.
It's always fun, and that's part of why I was like, you and I need a chat, and then maybe from this we can outline some ideas. I sent you the PDF of the book, so if you want to look through that has a lot of like outline stuff that might spur your thoughts on like what you'd want to put out. And then we could do something like back and forth and maybe like script some stuff and record some things, and that would be so. I would have so much fun with that. It'd be great.
I'd be very.
I need shit to do right now.
So I'm looking right now. I've got 2 videos that I'm trying to finish by the end of this month, which we're at the end of the month. Didn't throw up. So I've got a video. I've got a Reacteria that I'm finishing. I've got a video about the evolutionary development of the human heart, which I'm releasing for the American Heart Association. I'm trying to get that done by the end of the month as well. I'm filming the Reacteria tonight, probably, and then getting that cranked out. I'm about to, people are asking in the comments, I'm doing the line, the Sunday show after dark at 7 p.m. So it's in 90 minutes. In March, I've got a couple of things that I'm working on, but I bet we can crank something out then, or we can crank something out in April before. I'm looking over here. I've got, in March, I'm going to Orlando for Free Flow, and in April, I'm doing Kansas City Oasis. So Kansas City Oasis is going to be less of a time crunch for me. It would probably be easier to do something there. But like, let's set for the end of March. Let's shoot for the end of March, and we'll see if we can put something out.
That's a good. I can do early April, but my book comes out April 22nd. So after that, I'm going to be flat out doing stuff for this.
Just book things. Yeah. So then let's shoot for mid-March to early April. Let's have something written by then. And so I'll text you or email you and come up with just like, we'll get a Google Doc started and we'll start writing out a script and we'll come up with some ideas.
Love it. That's awesome. Someone asked me if I liked Avatar, and yes, that was why I brought up when you talked about insisted like tapeworms in your brain. I was like, yeah, like Aang and Avatar.
I've never seen Avatar, but I know that reference. I've seen that.
Okay, well, you should at least watch the first episode so you can see him all like in an ice ball kind of thing. It's a surprisingly
I've
good
seen
show.
that clip, but I don't know anything about anything else with it. You know. Anyway, I appreciate you hanging out with me, my dude. It's always a pleasure chatting with you. I hope to get to visit you someday, and I can't wait.